Lonneke, thanks very much for joining us. We've recently been at COP26 and the focus is very much on reducing carbon in the built environment. And I know that INREV has also recently produced a report on the issue. So it'd be interesting just to get, I suppose, the key takeaways.
The paper focuses on the definition of a net zero carbon strategy, building and target, answers the questions why a real estate vehicle should set up such a target. As you probably know, there are many definitions and frameworks that define net zero carbon, and this paper provides references to the definitions that are relevant for real estate industry. And net zero carbon targets are relevant to all investors, investment managers, and the vehicles, but each will have to tailor it to their specific investment management strategy and their planned holding periods. So, for example, investors and investment managers of closed-end value-added vehicles should still address the transition risks that occur in the future and act where feasible. And this paper elaborates on this.
Lonneke, from an investor's point of view, how should they look to achieve a net zero target? If we're looking at areas such as operational carbon, off-site renewable energy procurement, offsetting, those kinds of elements?
Well, a net zero carbon target for operational real estate has to include the landlord control energy consumption of common spaces, the so-called Scope 1 and 2 emissions, but should also include occupier energy consumption, the Scope 3 emissions. And if we then look what is net zero operational energy, that can be defined when the amount of carbon emissions associated with the building's operational energy on an annual basis is zero or negative. And a net zero carbon building during the operational phase is highly efficient, energy efficient, and powered from on-site or off-site renewable energy sources, and with the remaining carbon balanced offset. And such a building should also be entirely powered by fossil-free energy and can therefore not have any on-site gas or other fuel. And if we look on the other side on a net zero carbon target for embodied carbon, that can be limited to the operational energy use at the construction site, carbon emissions in the manufacturing of building materials and their transportation to the site, or both. And these targets could also include the Scope 3 emissions that are emitted by all stakeholders related to the construction process. If we then look what the net zero embodied carbon definition is that is when the amount of carbon emissions associated with a building's product and construction states up to the practical completion is zero or negative through, again, use of offsets of the net export of on-site renewable energies. But also when a building has been acquired as a standing investment, the embodied carbon is fixed. So the embodied carbon cannot be influenced anymore, and then the focus should be on offsetting any remaining embodied carbon from the standing investments and minimize the operational carbon.
There's a lot of discussion, obviously, around ESG, carbon neutrality. But I suppose, how should investors and managers actually prepare for net zero carbon?
Yeah, it's very important to set a net zero carbon target, and that should be guided by the investment strategies and the asset portfolio of the investment vehicles. So investment managers, in consultation with the investors, should consider the following steps. First, you need to define a net zero carbon strategy. You need to create a business case. It's also very important then to develop a clear and suitable methodology to incorporate any assessment of net zero carbon costs and the return of investment into the underwriting. It's important to establish a measurement framework and baseline carbon footprint. Implement action to achieve net zero carbon throughout asset management and in the due diligence process when acquiring new assets or divesting existing assets. It is very important to regularly monitor, disclose, and verify the implementation of your net zero carbon strategy. And you need to continuously improve of this net zero carbon strategy.
Obviously, you're talking to the investors the whole time. What are you seeing in terms of the challenges faced, when trying to implement these sort of net zero targets?
Yeah, there are still many challenges. Let's be honest about this, both for the investors and investment managers across the industry. And therefore, it is important there is a clear and consistent approach on how a net zero carbon target can be implemented across the industry. Then, as an example, further work is definitely needed on for development and refurbishment that present a challenge for energy and carbon efficiency, because there is a common performance gap between what is designed and intent and the actual operational in use. And therefore, it's very important for a post-completion reviews all the time. That's one element. But there's also a lack of standardized disclosure around net zero carbon targets and the implementation. So that needs to be worked on. And there's also, for example, a significant skill gap in the industry across the whole the chain, from designers and engineers to the property managers and the asset managers, lawyers, etc. But everybody needs to have a solid understanding of the climate risk and the net zero carbon in order for the transition challenge to be met as the industry.
And are your members also seeing this as a I suppose as an opportunity, Lonneke? I mean, given the focus that we're seeing increasingly on impact, purpose-driven investment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because establishing a net zero carbon target to guide the investment and asset management strategy of a real estate investment vehicle can have a number of benefits in today's market environment. For example, mitigating compliance risk in an increasingly regulated environment, or meeting increasing tenant demand. But also in improving operational efficiency. And let's not forget, reduce cost of capital.
I think it's really interesting to see how this conversation has moved on so significantly over the past 12 months.
Yes.
Really interesting to catch up on this topic, Lonneke. Thanks very much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.